The tray hit the marble floor before Nora Ellis had fully crossed the threshold, sending 12 white pills skittering in 12 different directions across the foyer of what was, without question, the most intimidating house she had ever set foot in. 4 men in dark suits turned to look at her. The one nearest the staircase moved his hand toward his jacket. Nora crouched down immediately, picked up the nearest pill, held it up to the light filtering through the tall windows, and said, "These are calcium supplements. Somebody in this house needs better bone density, which is a perfectly valid concern, and I respect that." Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. The man near the staircase had not removed his hand from his jacket. From across the foyer, seated in a wheelchair positioned at the base of the grand staircase, like a man who had chosen to rule from a lower elevation rather than been forced to, Damien Voss looked at her with the kind of stillness that was not calm. It was the stillness of a predator deciding whether something was worth the energy to kill. Nora kept collecting pills. She placed each one back on the tray she had righted, taking her time, noting that the tray itself was a flimsy decorative piece entirely unsuited for carrying medication. "You need a proper medicine organizer," she said, straightening up and looking directly at Damien Voss for the first time. She had done her research before accepting this job, or at least the research that was available to someone without federal clearance. 41 years old, former head of the Voss operation on the Eastern Seaboard, now reduced in public record to the category of private investor, paralyzed from the waist down following what the police report called an incident involving a motor vehicle, which fooled no one who read between the lines. He had dark eyes that had probably never, in 4 decades of living, conveyed anything resembling uncertainty. They were conveying something close to it now, which Nora suspected was not uncertainty at all, but rather the rare experience of encountering a person who had not yet flinched. "You're the caregiver," he said. His voice was low and measured, the kind of voice that had spent years being listened to without needing to be raised. It was not a question. It was a category he was placing her in, the way you labeled something before deciding what to do with it. "Nora Ellis," she confirmed, setting the tray down on the entry table and pulling her bag higher on her shoulder. "I prefer the term home health specialist, but I understand the industry hasn't caught up yet." One of the suited men shifted his weight. Damien Voss did not look at the suited men. He kept looking at her, and she got the impression that this was a room where people usually looked away first. She did not look away. She had spent too many years in chaotic households, understaffed clinics, and one memorable semester at a nursing facility where 3 of her supervisors quit within 60 days, to be meaningfully intimidated by a man with good bone structure and a well-pressed shirt. "Marcus," Damien said without turning his head. The man near the staircase finally lowered his hand and stepped forward. "Show her the schedule," Damien said. Then, still looking at Nora, "You have 24 hours. She was not entirely sure what that meant. She was fairly certain it was not a compliment. Marcus handed her a laminated sheet that listed medication times, physical therapy appointments, dietary restrictions, and a column of rules that ran to 11 items, the last of which read, "Do not initiate conversation unless spoken to first." Nora read the list carefully. She looked up. "This says no personal questions," she said. "Does that include asking what you want for breakfast? Or is that operational?" A muscle moved in Damien's jaw. It was almost imperceptible. "Operational," he said. "Good," she said, "because I make a very good scrambled egg, and I'd hate to violate a policy over protein." The morning proceeded in a manner that Nora would later describe, to no one in particular, since she had no one to describe it to, as eventful. She reorganized the medication shelf in the master bathroom because the previous system arranged everything alphabetically by brand name, which made no practical sense when you needed to locate something quickly in low light. She moved the physical therapy equipment 6 inches to the left in the rehabilitation room because it was positioned against a wall that received direct afternoon glare from the west-facing windows, which would make the required exercises harder than necessary. She asked the kitchen staff which of Damien's dietary restrictions were medical and which were preference, because there was a meaningful difference, and the young woman who seemed most approachable told her in a near whisper that he had not eaten a proper meal in 4 days. Nora wrote that down. She wrote a lot of things down in a small notebook she kept in her left jacket pocket, and when Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway and told her that writing things down was not part of the approved protocol, she told him she had a clinical memory condition that required external documentation and watched him try to decide if that was true. It was not true. Nora had an excellent memory. She needed the notebook for different reasons entirely. Reasons she did not examine too closely in the bright kitchen of the Voss residence while a nervous cook watched her from across a stainless steel counter. The first real collision of the day came at 11:45 in the morning. When Nora walked into the private study to bring Damien the 11 o'clock medication, she was already 45 minutes behind on, because nobody had shown her where it was kept, and the laminated sheet assumed knowledge she did not have. He was on a call. She could not hear the other voice, but she could hear the cadence of it through the half-open door. Terse, clipped, someone reporting rather than conversing. She knocked anyway, because 45 minutes late on medication was not acceptable regardless of what was happening on the other side of any door. Damien looked up with an expression she had not yet seen on him, something colder than the cold he had shown in the foyer, and held up one finger. She waited in the doorway. He finished the call in under 2 minutes, said something in a low voice she did not catch, and set the phone face down on the desk with the deliberate care of someone who had learned to control physical impulses. "You knocked," he said. "The schedule said 11 o'clock, she said. He looked at the small paper cup of medication she was holding. "It also says not to interrupt. It says not to initiate conversation," she said. "Knocking is a courtesy, not a conversation. Here." She crossed to the desk and set the cup down, along with a glass of water she had carried in her other hand. He looked at the glass, then at her, and something shifted in his expression that she could not read. He took the medication without commenting. She turned to leave. "Ellis," he said. She stopped. "The study is off limits." She turned back just enough to see his profile. "The schedule doesn't list it as off limits," she said. "I'm adding it now," he said. She nodded once and left, noting that he had used her last name and not her first, which was either professional distance or deliberate impersonality, and that either way it told her something about how he had lived for a very long time. The afternoon was quieter, but not easier. The physical therapist, a careful man named Dr. Reyes, who arrived at 3 in the afternoon, briefed Nora in the hallway before his session with Damien and told her, without apparent emotion, that the previous 3 home health specialists had lasted an average of 6 days each, and that the one before them had lasted 11 hours. Nora asked him what the usual reason was. He said the atmosphere. She asked him if he meant the security, the silence, or the man himself. He said all 3, in that order, but mostly the third. She thanked him for his honesty and went to change the sheets in the guest room that had been assigned to her, because apparently the position was residential, a detail the placement agency had communicated in the manner of someone mentioning it in passing and hoping it would not be a deal-breaker. It was not a deal-breaker. Nora had lived in worse places. She had lived in a converted storage unit in Hoboken for 3 months one winter, partly because of financial necessity, and partly because she had been asked to leave her previous apartment due to an incident involving a neighbor's faulty wiring and Nora's attempt to fix it without a license. The guest room in the Voss residence had a king bed, blackout curtains, and a bathroom with heated floors. She had stayed in significantly worse situations for significantly less complicated reasons. At 9:45 that evening, after Damien had taken his final medications of the day without comment and retired to his room with the door closed and the light visible beneath the crack for another 2 hours, Nora sat in the hallway outside her room with her back against the wall and her phone face up on her knee. It rang at 10:12. She looked at the name on the screen for a long moment before answering, and when she did, she stood up and walked to the far end of the hallway, near the window that overlooked the dark lawn and the tree line beyond it, where she knew, because she had noted it on arrival, that at least 2 security cameras were pointed in the opposite direction. "I just got here," she said quietly, before the other person could speak. There was a pause on the other end, then a voice, measured and unhurried in the way that expensive education and a lifetime of getting what it wanted produced. And she watched her own reflection in the dark glass. "And nothing yet," she said. "It's the first day." Another pause. "You have time," the voice said. "Not much, but some. Don't waste it being sentimental." The call ended before she could respond, which was how most of those calls ended, and Nora stood at the window for a moment longer, looking at the faint outline of the trees before she turned back toward the hallway. At the far end, the light under Damien's door had gone out. She stood very still, listening to the silence of a house that was not, she was beginning to understand, as asleep as it appeared. By the end of the first week, Nora had established 3 things about Damien Voss. First, he slept badly, which she knew because the light under his door appeared at irregular hours between 2 and 4 in the morning and did not move until well past 6. Second, he ate only when food was placed directly in front of him, not when it was offered or mentioned or described, a distinction that had taken her 3 days to understand and 1 additional day to implement, without comment. Third, and most relevant to her present situation, he watched her the way a man watches something he has not yet decided is dangerous, not the way his security team watched her, which was the flat surveillance of professionals doing their job. The way Damien watched her was different. It was the attention of someone building a case. She had been careful. She had been careful in the specific way that required her to also appear careless, because a person hired as a chaotic presence who suddenly became precise and quiet would draw more attention than a chaotic presence who remained consistently chaotic. So she continued to reorganize things according to logic that was genuinely hers, to ask questions that were 1 degree more personal than the rulebook permitted, and to make the small errors that a real person made in an unfamiliar household. Wrong cabinet for the coffee, wrong setting on the elevator that served the upper floors, wrong corridor twice in a row before she found the linen closet. What she did not do was enter any room she had not been explicitly shown. What she did not do was linger near the office on the ground floor where she had seen, on the second morning, a laptop open to something she had no business seeing. What she did not do was show any sign that the notebook in her jacket pocket contained anything other than medication schedules and food preferences. The collision she had not planned for came on a Tuesday. She had been told the meeting room on the second floor was used for private calls and was off limits between 10 in the morning and noon. She had not been told that the schedule changed when someone arrived unannounced, which was apparently what happened when 3 men in coats that cost more than most people's monthly rent appeared at the front entrance at 9:40 and were escorted upstairs without any of the usual procedural delays. Nora found out about this because she was already on the second floor at 9:50, carrying a tray with Damien's morning supplements and a small pot of green tea, following the schedule that had not yet been updated to account for the unannounced visitors. She pushed the door open with her shoulder because both hands were occupied and walked into a room containing Damien, Marcus, and 3 men she had never seen before, all of whom went very quiet, very fast. "I am so sorry," she said, which was true. She set the tray down on the nearest surface because holding it was suddenly not the priority. The schedule said 10. I didn't know. She was speaking to Damien, but she was also taking in the room the way she had trained herself to take in rooms. Door positions, number of people, where hands were, what was on the table. There was a map on the table. She did not look at the map. One of the 3 men in expensive coats had already stood up. "Who is this?" he said, not as a question but as an assessment of a problem. "My home health specialist," Damien said. The flatness in his voice was not the same flatness he used with her. This was the flatness of someone communicating, to the man who had stood up, that the next sentence out of that man's mouth needed to be chosen with care. The man sat back down. "She was just leaving," Damien said. Nora picked up the tray. "I'll leave the tea," she said, because the tea was for Damien, and his instructions were clear about not missing the morning supplement window. She set the cup and the small container of supplements at the end of the table nearest him, far from the papers and the map, and left without looking back. In the hallway, she walked at a normal pace. She did not stop. She did not slow down near the door to listen, because the door had already closed and because there were 2 additional security personnel stationed at the stairwell end of the corridor, who were watching her with the particular attention of people who had been told to watch her. She went downstairs, returned the tray to the kitchen, and spent the next 40 minutes helping the cook portion out the week's medications into a proper daily organizer she had ordered with her own money, because the alternative was another incident with a decorative tray on marble. Damien found her in the rehabilitation room at 2 in the afternoon. She had been told he refused the physical therapy sessions consistently, that Dr. Reyes arrived every Tuesday and Thursday and spent approximately 20 minutes attempting to engage him before leaving a set of exercises that went untouched until the next visit. The rehabilitation room had clearly been designed with genuine intention. Parallel bars along one wall, a weight bench calibrated for upper body work, a padded mat area, and a set of resistance tools appropriate for the specific type of spinal injury she had read about in the medical file she had been given access to on her second day. What the room did not have was any indication of recent use. The mat had no compression marks. The resistance bands were in their original packaging. "You haven't touched any of this," she said, when she heard his wheelchair in the doorway. He did not answer. She turned around. He was looking at the parallel bars the way a person looks at something they have a complicated history with. "Dr. Reyes says you did 4 sessions in the first 2 months and then stopped," she said. "Dr. Reyes talks too much," Damien said. "He talks exactly the right amount," she said. "He told me what I needed to know so I could do my job, which is this." She pulled the resistance band set from the shelf, removed the packaging without ceremony, and held one out toward him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "No," he said. "Okay," she said. She sat down on the mat, cross-legged, holding the band in her lap. "Then I'll just sit here until you change your mind, because I have nowhere else to be for the next 2 hours, and I already finished the medication organizing." He stared at her for a long moment. "That is not how this works," he said. "I know," she said pleasantly. "I'm improvising." He did the exercises. Not because she persuaded him, exactly, but because she did not leave, and somewhere in the 3rd minute of sitting on the mat saying nothing, the silence shifted from standoff to something else she did not have a clean word for. She guided him through the resistance sequence with the particular kind of directness that had nothing to do with being gentle and everything to do with being practical, correcting his angle once, telling him when he was compensating with the wrong muscle group, and not commenting when she saw his jaw tighten against something that was clearly pain. Afterward, when he had set the band down and was breathing in the controlled way of someone who had learned not to show effort, she said, "You felt something, didn't you?" It was not a question. He did not answer for a moment. Then, a sensation in the left hip. "It's happened before." "How often?" "Twice. In 11 months. She nodded. She wrote it in her notebook. "That's important," she said. He looked at the notebook. "Why are you writing that down?" "Because in 3 weeks I want to be able to tell you whether it's happening more often," she said. He looked at her with the same expression he had used in the foyer on the first day, that quality of stillness that was not calm, but something had changed in it. She could not name what. That evening, Marcus appeared in the doorway of her room with the particular expression of a man delivering information he had been instructed to deliver without inflection. "Mr. Voss wants to know where you worked before this placement," Marcus said. Nora looked up from the notebook she was updating. "The placement agency has my full work history," she said. "He's already contacted the agency," Marcus said. "He wants to know if there's anything they might not have." She held Marcus's gaze for a moment. "Tell him I've worked in home care settings, 2 clinical facilities, and 1 very unusual situation involving a retired federal judge in Connecticut who I am not legally able to discuss," she said. "Tell him all of that is verifiable and none of it is interesting." Marcus left. Nora looked down at the notebook page in front of her, where she had written the time of the sensation in Damien's left hip and the specific exercise that had preceded it. Below that, in smaller writing, She had written a different kind of note, one she would need to decide what to do with before her window ran out. Downstairs, in the room she had not been shown and had not approached, a secure line was open. A voice she did not know was telling Damien Voss that the name Nora Ellis did not appear in any employment database before 14 months ago. That before 14 months ago, the name did not exist. Damien listened to this in the way he listened to everything, without visible reaction, without interruption, and with the quality of attention that meant every word was being stored somewhere, it would not be forgotten. When the voice finished, he said, "Keep looking." Then he closed the line, and in the room above him, the notebook closed at exactly the same moment, and the house was quiet around two people who were, for the first time since her arrival, thinking about the same thing from opposite sides of the same wall. The call came at 2:17 in the morning, which Nora knew because she had been awake since 1:45, lying in the dark of the guest room listening to the house settle around her and running calculations she did not want to run. She had been in the Voss residence for 11 days. She had made progress of a kind, though not the kind her father was waiting for. She had learned the rhythm of the house, the geography of its silences, the difference between the security rotations that happened on a schedule and the ones that happened when Damien felt something was wrong. She had learned that he felt something was wrong with increasing frequency, and that his instincts in this regard were, frustratingly, excellent. She let the call ring 4 times before she answered, which was 1 ring longer than usual. A small act of resistance that changed nothing. She went to the bathroom, closed the door, turned on the tap to create ambient noise, and sat on the edge of the tub. "You haven't sent anything in 6 days," her father said. Vincent Ellis did not say hello. He had never said hello on a phone call in her memory, which was a minor thing that had nonetheless accumulated weight over 28 years of minor things. "There's nothing to send," she said. His internal schedule changes. The meetings don't follow a pattern. "Everything follows a pattern if you look long enough," he said. "I need the transfer routes, the ones he uses to move assets when he's feeling exposed. He's going to feel very exposed soon, and I want to know where he runs." Nora pressed her free hand flat against the cool porcelain of the tub and said nothing. "Nora, I heard you," she said. "I'm working on it." A pause, the kind her father used when he was deciding whether a person was telling the truth or a version of it. "He's not what you expected," Vincent said. It was not a question. It was the particular observation of a man who had learned to read reluctance in a voice. "He's difficult," she said. "That's expected." "I didn't say difficult," her father said. "I said not what you expected. Those are different things." She did not answer. "Don't make this complicated," he said. And then, before she could respond, the call ended. The tap was still running. She turned it off and sat in the sudden quiet, looking at her own hands. She was back in her room before 3 in the morning. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about what her father had not said directly but had communicated with complete clarity. That the window was closing, that he was not waiting indefinitely, and that whatever she had started to feel in the 11 days inside this house needed to stop feeling like anything at all. The problem was that it had already become something she did not have a clean way to reverse. She had watched a man she had expected to be straightforwardly monstrous turn out to be something more inconvenient than that. Not good, not innocent of what people said about him, but also present in a way that surprised her, attentive without softness, and alone in a manner that had nothing to do with the number of people in the building and everything to do with something older and more deliberate than circumstance. She was measuring coffee in the kitchen at 6:40 when Damien appeared in the doorway. He was earlier than usual. He looked at her with the particular quality of attention she had learned to identify as something other than suspicion. "You didn't sleep," he said. It was the first time he had opened a conversation without being addressed first. "I slept a little," she said, which was true and also the kind of true that was not. She poured the coffee and set the cup in front of him on the kitchen island, because the formal dining room at 6:40 in the morning was an unnecessary distance. He had started taking his morning coffee in the kitchen 5 days ago, a shift that had happened without either of them naming it. The physical therapy showed results on the scan, he said. She looked up. Dr. Reyes ran a new series Tuesday, he continued. There's measurable change in the nerve response in the left hip and lower lumbar. She held herself very still, because the thing she felt hearing that was not something she had planned for and not something she wanted visible. That's good, she said. That's very good. He watched her over the rim of the cup. You're surprised, he said. I'm not surprised, she said. I'm glad. He set the cup down. People are not usually glad about things that don't benefit them, he said. I'm glad when a treatment works, she said. That's the job. Is it? He said. And the way he said it was not aggressive. It was simply precise. The way everything he said was precise. And it landed somewhere she was not prepared to have things land. The conversation that followed was the longest uninterrupted exchange they had managed since her arrival, and it happened over coffee and a plate of toast she made without asking, because he had not eaten before 10 in the morning in 11 days, and that was a pattern she had decided to disrupt. He did not eat the toast immediately. He ate it in the middle of a sentence about the architecture of the house, which he had bought 12 years ago, and which had required, he said, significant structural modification for reasons he did not specify. She did not ask what the reasons were. She asked instead whether the modifications included the south-facing corridor on the 3rd floor that seemed, based on the external geometry of the building, to be about 15 feet shorter on the inside than the outside suggested. He looked at her with something that was close to, though not identical to, being caught. You notice things, he said. I work in people's homes, she said. You learn the shape of a place. He considered this for a moment. Then, the corridor has a utility installation behind the wall. She nodded. She did not write that down in front of him. The afternoon brought the exchange she had been anticipating and dreading in roughly equal measure. Damien called her into the study at 3, which was the room she had been told was off-limits, and which she entered now because he had opened the door himself and stood in the entrance, which constituted an invitation by any reasonable measure. He did not offer her a seat. He sat behind the desk and looked at her with the direct, undecorated attention of someone who was done approaching a subject from angles. Tell me about your father, he said. The air in the room did not change. She did not let it change. I don't have a relationship with my father, she said. That's what you'd like to tell me, he said. I'm asking about him specifically. She looked at him. What do you already know, she said, because it was the right question and because answering a question with a question was, in this room, the only currency that had value. A pause. Something moved behind his eyes. A recalibration, the recognition that she was not playing by the script he had prepared. That your name before 14 months ago was different, he said. That the agency didn't recruit you. That you applied directly, 3 days after Marcus posted the listing on a private employment board that was not publicly accessible. She had known this moment was coming. She had been building toward it and away from it simultaneously for 11 days. And now that it was here, she found that what she felt was not fear, but something closer to relief, the particular relief of a person who has been holding something heavy and can finally set it down. My mother changed my name when I was 7, she said. She changed hers too. She had reasons. And your father, Damien said. Did he agree with those reasons? No, she said. He didn't. The name was in the room before she said it. She could feel it the way you feel pressure before a change in weather. Damien Voss had survived long enough in the world he inhabited to develop a physical sensitivity to the weight of certain information before it was spoken. She watched him watching her and understood that what happened in the next 60 seconds would determine something that could not be undetermined. His name is Vincent Ellis, she said. The silence afterward was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a man processing something he had half expected but had not, until this moment, been certain of. And now the certainty arrived and settled into him like a key turning in a lock. The temperature of the room did not change. She did not move. His hands, flat on the desk in front of him, did not move. And then he said, very quietly, "Get out of this room." She left. She closed the door behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and breathed once, slowly, and listened to the absolute silence on the other side of the door, which was the most frightening sound she had heard in 11 days. That night, from the window of her room, she watched 2 of the security detail cross the lawn in a pattern that was not part of any rotation she had memorized. They were moving toward the perimeter, not outward, inward, as if something at the edge of the property needed to be pushed back. She stood at the window for a long time. She did not call her father. Below her, in the study, she had been asked to leave. A light burned until well past midnight, and the man behind the desk was deciding, with the particular cold clarity of someone who had survived this long by making decisions quickly and not revisiting them, what to do about a woman who was either the most dangerous person in his house or the only honest one. He did not come for her that night. She had half expected him to, had lain awake until 3 in the morning listening for the sound of his wheelchair in the corridor outside her room, or worse, for the sound of Marcus and someone else, and neither came. What came instead was silence so complete it felt constructed, the silence of a house that had been told to hold still. She understood, by the time pale light began to show at the edge of the curtains, that the waiting was the message. He was deciding, and the fact that he was deciding, rather than acting, told her something she filed away in the part of her mind she reserved for information that changed the shape of a situation. At 7 in the morning she went to the kitchen and made coffee the way she always did, because routine was the only armor available to her, and she intended to wear it. Marcus appeared at 7:15 and told her, with the inflectionless precision of a man delivering a sentence, that she was not to leave the property. She asked if she was being detained. He said no. She asked if her duties were suspended. He said no. She asked who would be bringing Damien his morning medication if not her, and Marcus looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had been given instructions that did not account for this particular question, and then he left. She brought the medication herself at 7:30. She knocked. She waited. The door opened. Damien looked like a man who had not slept, which was to say he looked more or less as he always did, but with the particular edge of someone who had spent the night sharpening something. He was dressed. He was at the desk. The room behind him had the quality of a space where decisions had been made and the evidence of the process cleared away. He looked at the medication cup she was holding and then at her face, and she had the distinct impression that he was looking for something specific, some sign of guilt or calculation or fear. She gave him the cup. He took it. She turned to leave. "Sit down," he said. She turned back. There was no chair on her side of the desk. She looked at him. He looked at the absence of a chair, then at Marcus in the doorway, and Marcus produced a chair from somewhere in the corridor with the efficiency of a man who had anticipated this and placed it in front of the desk. She sat. "You knew who I was before you came here," Damien said. "Not an accusation. A statement of coordinates, the way you name a location before discussing what happened there." "Yes," she said. "You know what your father wants." "Yes," she said again, "and you haven't given it to him." He said it as a fact, not a question, and she understood that he had already verified this, that the 11 days of her presence in this house had been observed at a level of granularity she had not fully accounted for. "No," she said, "I haven't." He leaned back in the chair, and the movement reminded her, unwillingly and precisely, of the first afternoon in the rehabilitation room, when he had set the resistance band down after the exercises and looked at something beyond the wall, with the expression of a person rediscovering a country they had been told no longer existed. "Why not?" he said. She had prepared for this question. She had prepared 3 different answers for this question in the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning. None of them felt adequate now, in this room, with him looking at her in the way he was looking at her. "Because I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear," she said. 3 days ago, on a call my father made to someone I didn't recognize. He said 7 days. He said the same location as last time. She watched Damien's face. Nothing moved on it except for something at the very back of his eyes, a small, precise ignition. "The same location," he said. "As last time," she said. The last time was the night on the bridge on the eastern approach, which was in the police report she had read as background and which her father had never, in any conversation she could remember, discussed directly. The silence in the room lasted long enough to become a third presence. Then Damien said, "Your father killed my brother." She had not known about the brother. She had not known, and the not knowing arrived in her chest like something structural failing, a quiet internal collapse that she did not let reach her face. "I didn't know that," she said. "I know you didn't," he said, and the flatness in his voice was different from any flatness she had heard from him before. It was not cold. It was something that had been cold for a very long time and had exhausted itself. What happened next happened quickly and not quickly at the same time, the way events do when they have been building toward a point long enough that the arrival feels both sudden and inevitable. At 11:40 in the morning, Marcus knocked on the study door and entered without waiting, which he had never done before, and said 2 words, "Eastern Perimeter." Damien looked at Nora. She looked at him. 3 days early," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and in that moment she understood that this was the thing she could not undo, that she was in this room, that she had told him that whatever came next she had made a choice that had no reverse direction. "Marcus," Damien said, "pull everyone in from the north side and put them on the east and south walls. Nobody moves until I say." Marcus left. Damien moved toward the door himself, and she stepped aside without being asked. And then he stopped and looked back at her over his shoulder. "You could have left last night," he said. "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She had prepared for this one too, in the same pre-dawn hours, with the same inadequate results. "Because he's going to try again," she said, "after this, and the time after that. And you deserve to know that, from someone who isn't trying to use it." He looked at her for 3 seconds, which in a room like this, with this man, was a significant unit of time. Then he moved into the corridor, and she followed because nobody had told her not to, and because in the architecture of this situation staying still was no longer an option that served anyone. The next 4 hours were not dramatic in the way that stories made violence dramatic. They were tense and procedural and conducted in low voices over radio channels she was not given access to, and she spent them in the interior room on the ground floor that Damien had directed Marcus to put her in, sitting on a chair near the window that faced the interior courtyard and listening to a house conduct the business of protecting itself. She heard 3 distinct exchanges of sound from the direction of the east wall, not gunfire, something more contained, and then a sustained silence, and then the particular quality of quiet that meant it was over. Marcus came for her at 4 in the afternoon. He did not say anything. He brought her to the main sitting room on the ground floor, which she had been in twice before for brief and unremarkable reasons, and which now contained Damien, 2 men she did not recognize, who were clearly not from the security team, and the specific atmosphere of a space in which something had been resolved. Damien looked at her when she came in. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the study that morning, with the quality of someone who had been asking a question all day and was now, reluctantly, beginning to arrive at an answer. 4 of your father's people," he said, "on the east perimeter. They were carrying equipment consistent with long-range positioning, not entry. He wasn't coming in. He was mapping." She understood what that meant. Her father was not attacking tonight. He was verifying geometry, confirming positions, preparing for something that was still being planned. The 7 days her father had mentioned on the call were not a countdown to this. They were a countdown to the next thing, and this had been reconnaissance. "He didn't know you knew," she said. "He doesn't know you talked to me," Damien said. It was not a question. "No," she said. "He doesn't." Damien looked at the 2 men in the room, who left without being asked, with the practiced discretion of people accustomed to being present at conversations that required their absence immediately afterward. Then it was the 2 of them, and the room, and the particular weight of everything that had been said and done since 7:30 that morning. "I'm going to tell you what I would normally do," Damien said. in a situation where someone in my house turned out to be connected to an enemy. She said nothing. I would remove the person, he said, quickly, without discussion. She said nothing. You're still here, he said. I'm aware, she said. He moved to the window and looked out at the courtyard, which was back to its usual stillness, the security team visible at the edges in their regular positions, as if the afternoon had not happened. You gave me information that cost you something, he said. Yes, she said. You could have left and said nothing. Your father would not have known you withheld anything. You would have been safe. Yes, she said again. He turned from the window and looked at her directly, with the full and undivided attention that she had learned, in 12 days, was the rarest thing he offered anyone. What do you want from me? He said. The question was not transactional. It was the question of a man who had spent a very long time in a world where everything was transactional, and was, with visible effort, attempting to ask something outside that framework. She looked at him. Nothing, she said. That's not an answer, he said. It's the only honest one I have right now, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she held his, and the room was quiet around them both, and outside the courtyard the light was beginning to change toward evening in the particular way it did in late autumn, slow and without drama, the day releasing its hold on the sky 1 degree at a time. You're not leaving tonight, he said finally. It was not a question and it was not an order. It was the statement of a man who had made a decision he was not yet prepared to name but was prepared to act on. No, she said. I'm not. Vincent Ellis was brought in by his own people on the 5th day, which was the part her father would have found most humiliating if he were a man capable of humiliation. He was not. What he was capable of was calculation, and the calculation had failed, and what remained after a failed calculation, in her father's world, was consequence. Damien had not gone to him. He had not needed to. The information Nora had provided about the timing and the location allowed the people who were already positioned, the ones who had been watching Vincent Ellis for 11 months before she had ever walked into the Voss residence, to move at the precise moment the second plan was set in motion. Her father had walked into a room he believed he controlled and discovered that the walls had been listening for nearly a year. The men who brought him in were not Damien's men. They were the men who had been her father's, which was the part of the consequence that had the most weight. Damien told her this on a Thursday morning over coffee in the kitchen, in the same place and the same quiet they had established over 2 weeks of mornings that had started as protocol and become something else without either of them deciding it should. He told her in the direct, undecorated way he told her most things now, as if information between them had ceased to require the usual packaging. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set her cup down and looked at the surface of the table for a moment. Is he alive? She said. Yes, Damien said. He'll be held for a while and then released with an understanding about geography. She understood what that meant. Her father would not return to the eastern seaboard. He would not approach the Voss operation again. He would live, which was more than many people received from Damien Voss, and she knew that and did not say it. He'll think I did this, she said. Yes, Damien said. He'd be right, she said. Yes, Damien said again, without inflection, and she appreciated the absence of comfort in it because comfort would have felt like condescension, and she had not asked for either. She asked to see her father that afternoon. Damien looked at her when she asked, with the quality of attention he used when he was assessing whether a request came from a place he could support or a place he needed to redirect. He said yes. Marcus drove her to a location she was not given in advance, a private holding space in a building that looked from the outside like a logistics firm, and from the inside like a place where conversations happened that did not exist afterward in any record. Her father was in a room with a table and 2 chairs, and the particular stripped quality of a space that had been deliberately emptied of anything a person could use to orient themselves. He looked smaller than she remembered, which surprised her, because he had always occupied more space than his actual dimensions warranted, the way certain people did when everything around them confirmed their importance. Without that confirmation, the dimensions were just dimensions. He looked at her when she came in. He He did not look surprised. "I wondered if it would be you," he said. She sat down across from him. She had thought, on the drive over, about what she would say. She had arranged and rearranged it the way she used to arrange the furniture in the apartments she moved through, trying to make a space feel like something it was not quite. None of the arrangements had held. "I'm not going to explain it to you," she said. "I know what you did," he said. Not angry, assessing. Even now, even here, the man across from her was filing information rather than feeling it. "I know you know," she said. "I came because I wanted to say something, and I didn't want to say it through anyone else." He waited. Her father had always been good at waiting. It was one of the things that had made him effective, and one of the things that had made him impossible to reach. "I've spent a long time," she said, "making excuses for the parts of you that I understood, and not looking too closely at the parts I didn't. I told myself it was complicated. I told myself you had reasons. I told myself that people who grow up in the kind of world you grew up in make choices that other people don't have to make." She stopped. She looked at him, at the face that was and was not familiar, the face she had spent 28 years trying to find something in. "I'm not going to tell myself that anymore," she said. "Not because of Damien, because of his brother, because you made a choice that ended someone's life, and you have never, not once, suggested to me that it cost you anything." Her father looked at her for a long moment. "It's a different world," he said. "You don't understand the rules." "I understand them perfectly," she said. "I've always understood them. I just kept hoping you'd turn out to be the exception to them." She stood up. "You're not," she said, "and I'm done looking." She did not look back when she left the room. The drive back to the Voss residence took 40 minutes, and she spent all of them looking out the window at the city going past, at the particular density of ordinary life happening in every direction, people crossing streets and carrying bags and stopping to check their phones, all of it continuing as it always had, indifferent to what had happened in a stripped room in a logistics building on the western edge of the borough. She was not crying. She was not going to cry. What she felt was not grief exactly, but the specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something they believed was necessary and has finally understood it was not. Damien was in the rehabilitation room when she got back. He was doing the resistance exercises without being told, without her present, which had not happened before today. She stood in the doorway and watched him complete the sequence with the particular concentration of someone who has decided to do a thing and removed from the decision all the weight of whether they wanted to. He finished the last repetition, set the band down, and looked at her in the doorway. "How did it go?" he said. "The way those things go," she said. He nodded. Once, the nod of a person who had had similar conversations with similar outcomes and understood that there was nothing useful to add to them. She came into the room and sat on the mat, in the same spot she had sat the first time, when he had told her he would not do the exercises, and she had told him she would simply wait. It felt like longer ago than it was. "I'm going to leave," she said. He said nothing. "Not tonight," she said. "But I can't stay here in the capacity I've been in. I'm not your caregiver. I was never actually your caregiver." "No," he said. "You weren't." She looked at her hands, folded in her lap. "I don't know what I am," she said. "In relation to any of this, to you, I don't have a category for it." "Neither do I," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the directness he had always used, but without the quality of assessment she had spent 2 weeks learning to read beneath it. The assessment was gone. What remained was something she had no prior experience with, from this man or anyone else, which was the expression of someone who had stopped trying to determine what something was and had simply arrived at what it was. "I don't need a caregiver," he said. "I know," she said. "I need someone who doesn't rearrange my medication shelf without telling me first," he said. "I told you," she said. "You told me after," he said. She almost smiled. "Almost, I need someone," he said, and stopped. And she understood that what came next was costing him something, not because he did not mean it, but because he had spent a very long time building the specific internal architecture required to not say things like what he was about to say. "Who is not afraid of me?" he said, "and is not pretending not to be afraid? Who is actually not afraid? That is rarer than you would think." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I've met you," he said. "You're the only one," he said. "In a long time, possibly ever." She held that, the weight of it, the particular kind of weight that came from something being true rather than tactical. The rehabilitation room was quiet around them. The resistance bands were on the floor where he had left them. Outside, through the high window, the light was the flat gold of late afternoon in November, the kind that lasted maybe 20 minutes before the sky changed its mind. "You did the full sequence," she said. "Yes," he said. "Without me here," she said. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She looked at the window. "What do you want for dinner?" she said. It was not a deflection. It was what it was. An ordinary question asked in an extraordinary room. The kind of question that only meant something because of what had preceded it, because of 2 weeks of mornings and one brother and a father, in a stripped room and a rehabilitation mat and a notebook full of small, precise observations that had become something none of them, individually, were supposed to become. He looked at her. She looked back. "Something that takes a long time to make," he said. She nodded. She got up from the mat. She went to the doorway and stopped, and looked back at him once, and what passed between them in that look did not require a name. She went to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard the soft movement of his wheelchair on the floor, and then, after a moment, the sound of him following. There was a sigh, later, when the kitchen was warm and the smell of something slow cooked had spread through the ground floor of the house, that she heard from the other side of the kitchen island. It was small and involuntary, and it was the sound of a man who had not sighed in front of another person in 7 years. She did not mention it. She kept her eyes on what she was doing, and the kitchen stayed warm, and outside the windows the November dark came in the way it always did, without asking.